Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech Talk, a podcast where we talk about all things tech. We don't just talk about the technology part of it, we also talk about how our society and culture is impacted by said technology. Today is a special episode. We have a couple of guests with us today, the co-founders of Bubble.io, Josh and Emmanuel. Thank you both for joining our podcast today. I am very excited to know about Bubble as a product and what kind of service consumers will expect to get. I mean, as a procrastinator myself, I sort of intentionally abstained from researching about Bubble.io so I can reflect the exact questions our audience will ask, because I want to ask the same questions that someone who doesn't know about Bubble would ask. So that's my excuse for not knowing about Bubble. So I'll start with what is Bubble? And if you guys also introduce yourselves, let's start with Josh.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on Tech Talk. My name is Josh Haas. I'm one of the founders of Bubble. And to sort of answer your question, I think of Bubble as a tool for letting anyone, not just a trained computer programmer, but anyone create software, specifically web applications. So if you want to make the next, Facebook or Twitter is going through some hard times, maybe it needs to be replaced. If you want to take a stab at that, we let it be possible for a non-programmer to do it. And I'll hand it over to Emmanuel to introduce himself.
Yeah, so Emmanuel Straschnov, and I'm the other founder of Bubble. Josh and I started working on Bubble 11 years ago now. And I'll add one thing to Josh's definition about Bubble. I think what we're trying to do is to make code not necessary for maybe 95% of the use cases today that require code. So code is not, it's still meant to stay, but it should be used only in like very rare cases. And for the rest, we should be using visual tools, and I hope it's Bubble.
So that's what I'd like to hear, to be honest, because I have tried to learn like hardcore programming since I was a teenager, but failed consistently for years. And I think it's decades now that I still am not able to have like really proper grasp on, programming languages to build standalone applications. But I definitely do have a lot of ideas about various applications that would help people. And it might be quite popular in different ways, in different industries, etc. But I never had this opportunity to sort of make my ideas into reality because I lack that core competency of being able to have that, being able to code like a hardcore developer. And it's really sort of refreshing to know that there are solutions exist that could help me bring my ideas into reality, but not having to, learn something that's probably I'm too thick to understand.
Yeah, I have actually a past experience with Bubble because me and my friends during lockdown we thought, okay, let's create an app, and we none of us knew coding, and we thought, okay, what's the best way to do it? So I started learning how to code, and I started building an app using HTML and CSS. But one of my friends, he looked at Bubble and he said, but you can create something using Bubble. And we actually created the whole app on Bubble. So we created a database, we created the logins, we integrated with SendGrid. So it was kind of amazing. Like you can launch something very quickly. Like if you have an idea, you can build something and launch very quickly. So my experience was good, but then I have questions around my experience as well later. But I just wanted to ask you why the name Bubble? I mean, it's a low code platform. Bubble is very interesting. So what does Bubble actually signify here?
Yeah, so for us, our mission, right, is to make software creation really accessible, and we wanted a name that sort of reflected that, something that's like light, airy, friendly, non-threatening, right? Because, like a lot of people are intimidated by writing software, and coding sounds super technical. And we want to make the point that you can create software without it being super technical. So, Bubble is short, it's memorable, it's an easy word to hang on to, and it kind of gives that impression. And that was kind of why we went with that for the name.
Another good thing that we liked about this name is that we see Bubble as being much more than what it is today. I mean, today, we're one tool to build web applications, but we think in the long term, Bubble should be much bigger than that, because there are so many places where we can empower people to do more in simpler ways with technology. And so Bubble is a name that can evolve with that. When we started, a lot of people would have named something like this, app builder, app inventor. In fact, it was some products, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have something that was more generic and that could be applied in many different contexts, as long as it's around the mission of empowering people.
Nice. So that's interesting, because one of the things that we face, because I come from a non-programming background, is that okay, you want to build something, you have an idea, how do you scale it up? But I think one of the challenges, and you mentioned that you don't want Bubble to be just a app builder, but one of the challenges we faced is these days you build a website, but the website should work on a mobile device as well. And that's the biggest challenge, and we had to then use Bubble to modify it so that it works on the mobile platforms as well. So what was your initial thought process behind creating Bubble? Because I know that it's web app, but then do you have plans in or does it now work with building apps that works on desktop browsers, laptops, tablets, and then mobile devices?
Maybe I can start talking about why we chose web, and then Josh can talk about mobile plans. We chose the web because since at the beginning, and I still think it was the right call, web includes mobile, in a sense that, most of the things that, mobile, in fact, pretty much everything in the backend that the mobile app would use is the same thing that the website would use. And there are many aspects in terms of technical architecture that are simple by starting from the web. And also, if you can do mobile web, you can do mobile web, which gives an entry point into like the web mobile platforms. And so it felt like the right call. I'm not going to lie. There were times, because the company is 11 years old, where I was like, maybe it was a mistake or something. Now, knowing what we know today, I'm very convinced this was the right call to move, to start with the web, because it was a way to entry mobile. It was a way for us to see what people wanted to build on mobile, to start learning a lot of things before moving into more definite native plans. I'll let Josh talk about that, because we just had our first user conference like this week in New York, and so we actually made some announcement on mobile. So there's some exciting stuff to announce today.
Yeah, no, this is a funny timing for this question, because we flew for the very first time our entire user base together for our first ever conference. So we called it BubbleCon, which is amazing to see everyone in person when we've been sort of interacting with them over the internet. But yeah, one of the biggest announcement we made during BubbleCon is that 2024, we are going to ship a true native mobile builder for Android and iOS. And the concept there is going to be very similar to our web app builder. It's going to have all the same backend functionality, the ability to sort of, like you mentioned, you had I think talked to SendGrid, you'll still be able to do the same kind of API integrations. But the actual builder itself is going to be really native to the phone, so that when you build an iOS app with it, it really feels like something that belongs on iOS. Or when you build an Android app, it'll really feel like something that belongs on Android. So this is one of the biggest things we're going to do in 2024, and we're super excited. As far as desktop goes, that's probably a project for another year. I would love to do it, but one thing at a time.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So one of the things, as someone who's not actually familiar with Bubble before, Amit, you've used it, which is amazing. I mean, it probably feels really good to have used a product and then be able to sort of talk to the founders of that product. But if I was like a consumer who don't know anything about Bubble, so the question that comes to my mind is, what are the example? I mean, we talk about web app, but there could be so many variations of web app, and then there is mobile apps. So what would you say your flagship web app is that everyone would know that was built on Bubble?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of our marketing challenges, because you're right, web applications can be any type of applications. I would say usually, and then I can give specific examples, but they fall into like three main categories. It's either some kind of a social network, Twitter being a social network, Facebook being a social network, being like a platform where you're going to have users meeting, like a dating app, for instance, is a kind of a social network. And so that's one major thing we're seeing, because people tend to use Bubble to start companies and build customer-facing products. And so social network is a big thing. Again, social platforms, let's say, are a big thing that people are thinking about when they start companies. We also see a lot of, marketplaces. So, you think about Airbnb, for instance, is a typical marketplace that you would think of, where you have, sellers and buyers exchanging things, and the entire transaction happens on the platform. A lot of our users do that. And then the last category we're seeing, which is a little bit more diverse in itself, it's people building software as a service products that then they distribute to other businesses. So these web applications are usually, subscription based. So someone would provide a service. It can be, a tool that lets you build invoicing, can be a tool that gives you access to like a particular, in fact, one of the stories we were discussing at BubbleCon was this AI company that created a proprietary AI model and built the entire thing on Bubble, giving access to, the most recent models depending on their needs, and it's to non-technical people. And that's something that people can access through a subscription-based service on our platform. It's called SeedsFlow AI. That's a typical example of a startup that, doesn't know how to code, needs to build a product that would require engineers, but instead of requiring engineers, they use Bubble instead. I would say that that's how I would really summarize what Bubble can do. When there is already a tool on the market and you can do something without code, it's usually not when people go to Bubble, because Bubble can do more, which means there's usually, more customization, meaning a little bit more work to build. And so if there is already like a SaaS tool that lets you build where you need without code, that usually not where Bubble shines the best. Where Bubble shines is really when you're thinking, okay, I really need to find a technical co-founder, or I really need to go to a local dev shop to have them build my product. And usually it's very significant amounts of money, by the way, that are required then. That's when Bubble shines the best.
Oh, right. That's actually, what you've mentioned is quite complex sets of solutions, like marketplaces and social networks. I can imagine the level of, the technical expertise that would be required to sort of get something off the ground of this kind of things. So how would you, obviously, the social networks like Facebook or marketplaces like Amazon, once a company is hopefully successful, which started off on Bubble, as they start to scale up, they would want to probably containerize each of their services, like probably using Kubernetes or other services, and then also try to get analytics and other things that Azure probably or AWS probably provide. How is that something that Bubble also provides, or how would one scale up if they started in Bubble and then now they need all of these different services that are usually industry standard?
Yeah, so our mission is to make a lot of that behind the scenes for you, right? Like, at the end of the day, the direction that cloud hosting platforms are going in is towards becoming more of a commodity. That's kind of what Kubernetes is in a way. It's like taking each of the individual clouds and making everything very, very standardized. And we're sort of taking it a step further, not even having to worry about like which containers you have, but having the Bubble backend behind the scenes. Like, our users don't necessarily know that there's a bunch of servers that are running and that we have to add more servers or shrink servers depending on usage or volume. We try and take care of that for them. So that's our strategy on scaling. Bring it in-house so that the person building the application can stay focused on the product themselves and doesn't even need to acquire some of that, pretty expensive and complicated DevOps expertise that you need to interact with a product like Kubernetes.
Oh wow, that's really amazing actually. Because I mean, what makes me think is that if someone, an entrepreneur, started a business and it started taking off, they probably wouldn't need to hire a CTO anymore.
Mhm.
So I mean, I have follow-up questions because I we had the same issue. We built Bubble and we scaled up our database. We were getting a lot of our orders. And by the way, our app was a marketplace app. So
Mhm.
in the pandemic, what we saw is that there are a lot of these people who are cooking at home and they are coordinating on WhatsApp to take orders. And then they needed some analytics. So we thought, okay, we can be a marketplace where the chefs can advertise their menus and the people can come in and place the orders, and they don't need any login. They just place an order and they get ahead with the collection. And what we enabled is we created the front end for the customers and the like a self-service portal. So we created two different portals, and we started getting a lot of orders. But then for us to get the analytics, we had to, at that time it was 2 years back. So that time I'm not sure what analytics was available, but we had to customize the analytics. Like we had to write the queries from the database to populate the data into some different table and then read and display it to our users. So I just wanted to understand, like, is that something that has been solved, or is it something that is going to be solved in the future? So
I don't know when in the last 11 years they were in customer
Mhm.
service, to be honest, but there you go. There's a customer service question for
yeah,
you guys.
because
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think it's a typical user scenario, right? Your database
yeah,
becomes too big, and then you want the analytics, and you are struggling, and then you have to customize the solution itself.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great example. I love your story of building an app on mobile because it's very typical of what we see. Someone who has a business idea that totally makes sense, would be super expensive to get off the ground by traditional methods, and they're able to bring something up. And yep, analytics is 100% a common need, right? Because like when you're having like a growing business, you need to like understand what's going on with it, right? So our typical solution is to make it easy to integrate with third-party analytics providers, right? Like, we try and be a central hub for everything you need to get started, but, we're not going to provide, analytics as strong as, a company that's like devoted their entire product to it. We want to make it super easy to integrate and push your data to it. We do have some capabilities for building it in-house. It sounds like you played with them and discovered that you could do it, but it requires some work. And it'd be nice if there's like a more out-of-the-box solution. And for that, like we kind of rely on sort of our ecosystem of integrations. One of Bubble's more powerful points, in my opinion, is that it can talk to basically anything. So you sort of get the benefit of sort of the full sort of software as a service entrepreneurship ecosystem supporting what you're building.
Cool, cool. And the other part was, I was thinking, I mean, there is Bubble, and Bubble makes making websites simple. And we also thought about WordPress, but we never actually use WordPress. So is Bubble trying to compete with WordPress, because WordPress is the biggest builder of web apps in the on in the world? But how does Bubble compete with a platform like WordPress? Because WordPress is now also providing solutions. Maybe not as complex as Bubble, because Bubble has, I think, better capabilities. WordPress can build simple websites, but when it comes to more complex websites, then WordPress again requires a lot of customization. So how does Bubble compete with, say, something like WordPress?
Yeah, I love WordPress. I built my personal homepage and my own blog on it back on the day. It's an amazing piece of software. We don't really view it as a competitor, right? Like, thinking to like what you described, what you built on Bubble, I think it'd be very hard to do on
Yes.
WordPress. And most of the people who choose Bubble wouldn't really be able to make WordPress work. I think, WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, like all these companies are in the space of really helping you get to like a website or a portfolio site or a blog. I think they're great. We're not really going head to head with them because they're solving sort of a very templated problem in many ways. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of expand the barriers of possibility and let people build things that weren't previously contemplated by the creators of the platform. So whenever someone asks us who our main competitor is, we usually answer code, right? Because it's really that custom development, custom software piece that we're really trying to provide a better answer for. So yeah, love WordPress, not really a competitor, but amazing software, and certainly worth checking out if your needs are a fit for it.
Right. That's really good to have this kind of understanding of the product that you guys founded. Now, I am kind of quite interested to know the journey of Bubble and you guys as co-founders. How did you come up with the idea, and what was the most of the challenging part in the last 11 years, as you mentioned that Bubble is up and running? So yeah, give us a sort of a brief on the journey that you experienced.
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that. Or maybe Josh, you want to talk about the origin idea, and then I can talk about the journey.
Yeah, so I came up with the idea originally, and then Emmanuel joined me very shortly thereafter, and we've been working together now for what, 12 years?
11 and a half.
11 and a half, feels like 12 years. And it's great. We actually got introduced via a mutual friend, and is very much like a spontaneous decision to work together. So I'll let Emmanuel tell the full story of that if he wants to. But yeah, I got the idea originally because I was sort of playing the role of the technical co-founder, helping sort of the kind of person who would have been one of our early customers, like a non-technical entrepreneur with like a clear vision for something he wanted to create, and no real means to bring it to life. So I partnered up with him. I built his product. We went to market, discovered, this is one of my first lessons in business, that like, if your customer base is super narrow and you have a hard time reaching them, it's hard to build a good business. So the startup didn't really succeed. But one of the things I took away from it was, why couldn't my partner have built this himself? Like, it actually might have succeeded as like a small lifestyle business for him had he been able to run with it without like needing to bring on an engineer like me. And I kept on wrestling with that thought, and I sort of realized, well, there is no reason he should be able to do it, right? Like he could say exactly what he'd want the computer to do. He could say like, this is what it should look like. This is what should happen when I click here. It's just that the vocabulary that traditional programming gave him was too complicated. It wasn't simple enough to let him describe it. So I had the idea. A friend put me in touch with Emmanuel, and if you want to talk about how you got involved in this and so the early days.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very sudden decision on my side, because when we met, I knew I wanted to work in tech, but I didn't think I could be starting a business in the US for some immigration reasons that I'm not sure the audience is aware of. But it's not super straightforward to start a company in the United States if you're not a US citizen or a permanent resident. And so we met for coffee, but I really thought that was just like some networking coffee, because I didn't think it was possible. And I already had found a job, actually, that I was pretty excited about at a startup in New York. And, 3 hours later, this was a long coffee. I decided to turn down the job and work with Josh instead, not knowing what I was doing really on the immigration side. But turns out there are ways to solve your problem from your immigration problem if you want to start the company. It's not simple, but there are ways to do that. And then it's difficult to summarize, 11 years in a few sentences. I'll give the main phases, because we have one thing that is pretty unusual that I think can be pretty interesting for people listening to us. Not necessarily something I would recommend to replicate, but the unusual thing in our history is that we didn't raise money for 7 years, which is not very usual, but it's not the most extraordinary thing. The weird thing is that for 5 years, it was just Josh and I, like it was just the two of us basically doing everything without scaling the team or raising funding, which is, has pros and cons. The pro is that it's an extraordinary way to be extremely focused on solving the problem of your users, because you don't do anything else, basically. Like, you don't spend time, talking to investors because you don't raise money, and you don't hire and manage people because, and that's, today when I look at what I'm doing, today we have 150 people, so the company has changed a lot. Basically what I'm doing is, managing and hiring people. But back then, it's not what we were doing. We were both like really heads down building the product. And so we had the ability to iterate extremely quickly in a way that I think was very important for us in the early years, because people at first had concerns about tools like Bubble. Like, people have tried to do that for a long time, telling people, oh, you can build anything you want without code. And the reason there's some skepticism is because often it didn't work. In fact, I think Bubble is the first time that it actually truly gets somewhere like really far. It got very far. And so it was important for us to remove limitations as they were happening at first. And for that, you need to execute very quickly. And so that's why I think it worked well for us. I'm saying I'm not necessarily recommending to spend 5 years with just your co-founder. I mean, you probably want to start thinking about scaling the team a little bit sooner than that. After 5 years of working together, we started building a team without raising money. So, bootstrapping, looking at, how much money we're making, how many people we can hire. So we got, I think, to 12 people bootstrapping. So it's almost like, feels like a small business in some ways, like scaling, growing pretty quickly because it's software. And so if you do well in software, you can actually have a pretty exciting growth rates, but it's not like we would, add, 20 people per year. Like, it took a couple of years to get to 12 people. And then after that, and that's early 2019, we moved into, I would say, the dark side of venture or the bright side of venture, depending on how people want to see it, which is venture-backed world, where we did the first round from a venture capital fund, and which was not, back then it was a pretty large round compared to our size at the time. Today it doesn't sound as big. I think it was about like 6 million. And 2 years later, when we had like a real acceleration, like a lot of in the companies in the tech space, I mean, that's when the pandemic hit, where we saw a lot of people trying to reinvent themselves and learn new skills, and in particular launch companies online. So it was for us like a huge boost in terms of adoption in 2020, 2021, which led us to raising a very significant round at time, because we're talking about 100 million in 2021. And so now we're more of a traditional like growth stage venture-backed company, which it's the same product, same founding team, same mission, actually. Like, we haven't pivoted in any way, but a very different way to do things compared to the first, 5 or even 7 years.
That's a very
Wow,
exciting
that's
journey. Very, very exciting journey. Because I think,
absolutely. And one of the things I noticed in the beginning of the story, Emmanuel, as you were saying it, is a repeating pattern I see in all of the sort of the successful success stories, that at one point in the beginning they had taken a massive risk. And that, at that time they didn't know what was going to happen, but then, leaving your job and then giving your 100% to this one thing that you believe in, that really paid off. And again, I mean, personally myself, I am really scared, and I feel like how is that a decision? How could that be a rational decision? But then again, there are actual sort of repeating example of this working out quite well. So that's like, I think, a turning point in the life of.
I actually think that for the first like 18 months or two, it is, if you don't have a family, like if you don't need to support a child, going to school and eating every day, and you're happy, eating junk food because it's cheap in New York, I would say it's not irrational to start a company at first, because I think the business world now looks at pretty well. Like, you tried something, it gives you like an interesting skill set to join a company. People will appreciate that. Having failed is not necessarily like seen as, oh my God, I'm not going to hire that person because he failed as an entrepreneur. Everybody knows it's hard, and so you're gaining some experience. And 18 months is not too long. I would say the real risk starts being in the longer term. Like, and I started feeling it, after 4 or 5 years when I would see, so I didn't work before, I was graduating from business school. I would see my classmates from business school after 5 years, seeing where they were in life and everything. And then I was like, oh, actually, if Bubble doesn't work out, then, what did I do for all this time? That's where I think there is a real risk. And that's where it becomes a little bit irrational to keep going. And in our case, I think it was irrational, actually. But at some point, this is called stubbornness. I think founders tend to be very stubborn. We started to do something. We had users already depending on us. And so I don't know if it was a rational thing to do to keep going, but it's just, I never considered that we could really stop doing it because people were depending on us and we were stubborn. But I would say, and I think it's important for people, I'm assuming some people in the audience are thinking potentially about starting companies. I think in the early months, early years, like maybe the first couple of years, in today's world, people tend to value a lot these kind of experiences. And I could almost say it's a rational thing to try out. Again, provided that you can afford living on your savings with a cheap lifestyle. I mean, in our case, that's what we were doing for the first couple of years. And don't put your family at risk. And that's why, a lot of founders tend to be pretty young because that's the time where you don't have a family to support.
Yeah.
The
I
other
think
thing,
that's one of the
sorry.
things that happened with us as well. Like we, three of us, we started and none of us had children. And that's why it's easy to start on the idea. But over the journey, we had kids and then the idea took it just went very slowly. And then to have the commitment to dedicate for this product, then it became very difficult. So now the good thing about the solution that we have in Bubble is that it's completely automated. We don't have to look, we don't have to do anything. It just runs and we know that it works and it's really great. So, I mean, Bubble has worked really well for us. But then, as you mentioned that it's a risk when you start something like that. So we took a risk and it didn't work out, but we learned a lot of things. So yeah, I think there is a good lesson there. So moving on from the journey, I wanted to understand so you have built something called low code app that can build these things. What is this app built on? And how are you? I mean, you don't have to say the technologies, but I mean, it's interesting like how things work behind the scenes. Like how do you make it so simple for people to create these apps on scale?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge secret. I'm happy to sort of chat about how it works. So our tech stack is actually not super exotic. We use Amazon Web Services for cloud hosting. We use Node.js for our servers. We use database technologies like Postgres and Redis and a few other things. But it's sort of the same tech stack you'd see at a lot of other companies. And the sort of secret sauce or special ingredient is when you're in the Bubble editor and sort of editing an application, what we're doing behind the scenes is we're creating essentially a document that describes your application. So describes here is each page of your website, here is everything that happens on that page, here's what happens when a user interacts with it. And that document we store in a database. And then when one of your users or your customers comes and visits your application, we pull that document up and we kind of read and interpret it on the fly. So we say okay, they're trying to visit this page, let's pull the data for that page. And then we quickly convert it to HTML and CSS behind the scenes and draw it in the user's web browser as they need it. So that's kind of the short version of what we're doing to make it work.
Wow, that's really good to know that kind of insight. I mean, part of it did go over my head because I just am not smart enough to understand all of that. But actually, it is. I think our audience would really enjoy knowing about the back end because curiosity is what we have all in common, and we want to know how it works, even if we don't always can replicate it. Now, obviously, talking about this, I wasn't aware of Bubble and its on the potential possibilities that could happen. So I've been sitting on this idea for I don't know how long, but The idea I have is basically an Uber for ice cream vans. I don't know what you have in US. I was only ever in US for a couple of weeks, but in here in London, what happens is ice cream vans in summertime comes sort of runs with the sound that is, and then you have to. I mean, I'm not a child, but I am a child in many ways. And you have to, like, for people who lives in flats and even who are in houses, I mean, you have to literally leave everything that's happening to be able to catch that ice cream van if you want one of those. But if I knew the locations and sort of which vans are in proximity to me at any point, if I looked at a map, I think that would be really helpful, and it would be helpful for ice cream vans to sort of gain more sales, because people who wants ice cream from ice cream vans, and those are like special ice cream van ice creams, are a lot more tastier in my opinion, and they would potentially have more sales. And this is an idea that I had because I have this issue in my life. I need ice cream van ice cream in summertime, but I never had the time or expertise to do anything about it. Within our audience, if any of you want to take my idea and create into a reality, you're absolutely welcome to, and I can give you more sort of advice if you need, or I could do it myself. Can I do this in Bubble? Because I would imaginably, I would need two front ends, one for the ice cream van seller and one for the buyer. Then the both will be mobile apps, and they both have to sync about each other's location. And also then there is all of these question about privacy and security and all of this. Can all of these be handled by Bubble?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's
would.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm pretty sure we have users who have built, not Uber for ice cream vans. That's a really cool idea. I like it a lot actually. But other kinds of like Uber for X or Uber for Y applications, and we have mapping as like sort of a built-in Bubble component. We have the ability to like real-time sync data between multiple devices, so that if one device is updating, its coordinates or information or whatever, it can get pushed to other devices listening in. So yeah, this is exactly the kind of idea that we're excited to see someone build, whether it's you or whether someone in the audience goes for it. I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that before, but yeah, to just go around randomly, right? Like, would they like to know where the customers are that are craving ice cream today? Probably make their routes much more efficient.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would be gutted if someone became a millionaire from this idea. But at the same time, if I could get instant access to the information where ice cream vans are, I think it would make me feel a little bit better. But no, now that I know about Bubble, I'll probably check out how I can do this. And yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how doors can open with conversation.
So I have a question now. So because I read your blog, Josh, and that was about generative AI, because ChatGPT has now come and people can, instead of using a low-code app, they can just ask ChatGPT to write code and build a website for them. I mean, I know that writing code is different from building an app, because you still have to host the code somewhere and you still have to figure out how will you interpret that code. But then I wanted to understand, like, in the age of now generative AI, where creating content and creating code or creating an app has become so easy, how does Bubble fit into that picture? And is Bubble trying to compete with something like generative AI, or is Bubble trying to merge with the generative AI technology and create something even better?
Yeah, Emmanuel, do you want to take the first stab at that and jump in?
No, why don't you go first, actually?
Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely merging is my opinion. Like, I think in some ways, like, no code and generative AI are trying to solve the same problem from two different angles, right? Like, generative AI is really about like, how can a computer be less frustrating to you, right? Like you tell a computer and you get exactly what you tell it to do. And generative AI is actually, you tell a computer and it sort of gets what you mean, which is like the thing that blew everyone away about ChatGPT, like it actually sort of like understands you in a way that previous interactions with computers didn't. And meanwhile, no code is about, what's the vocabulary you use to talk to a computer? Are you talking in like really low level, highly technical jargon? Are you talking about like, what your web page looks like, what happens when people interact with it, right? Like it's the level of vocabulary. So the merger state is when the tool gets what you mean from a generative AI perspective and can kind of like understand your intent and then speaks back to you at that high level of abstraction. That I think is like the sweet spot. And that's exactly what we're trying to build right now, where we have proof of concept of basically generative AI spitting out Bubble, so generating Bubble applications on demand. And so we're still testing it internally. We haven't released it to the public yet, but we're super excited about that direction because it feels like it takes our mission and like sort of elevates that mission to the next level.
Because I think generative AI is great, but it's never as good as a format it spits out. So the reason ChatGPT is great because it spits out text, which is our natural language, and so we can interact with them or with it, I guess. But if you think about building like application stuff like that, like most of the things we're seeing in the market are generating code, and I think it's way more exciting to generate something no code, because if it generates code, you still need to be a coder to be able to leverage these tools, and that reduces the market, like the number of people that can actually use these tools dramatically. If we can generate something that turns out to be something you can edit in a visual editor that doesn't even talk about code because it's no code, then suddenly the number of people that can leverage these tools and create things more easily is multiplied by probably a factor of 100 or something, and that becomes extremely exciting.
That is so cool because generative AI has that capability, and Bubble with the generative AI can be a superpower. So yeah, and I think it's a good mission. Like you want to enable more people to create ideas. Like if Rinat has an idea for Uber for ice cream vans, then you want people to be enabled by that and not restricted by technology. And I think most of the technology makes people scared. And they don't want to embrace it, but things like ChatGPT and maybe Bubble can help them get their idea into fruition. So my next question is that once you create an app, so say a startup wants to build an app and they use Bubble and they scale it to a certain degree, but then maybe they become a very big startup, something like yourself. You started with 2 people and now you're 150 people. So when you reach that stage, when you have a lot of customers and you have to maintain the database and you need analytics and so forth, so what's the recommendation for you for those people who have now matured, and can they still maybe have an enterprise level app using Bubble, or then do they have to shift to something else? And have you seen this progression? I'm sure there are a lot of people who are building websites, and you would have seen a lot of people maybe creating something and then maybe moving on to something else. So do you have any examples around that?
So we definitely want to keep people on the platform.
Of
Like we're
course,
not, our goal is not to be like a prototyping tool.
yeah.
We want to retain applications as they scale, because I don't think it makes a difference. Like, if we were able to help like a small team building their MVP and get their first clients, there's no reason why we can't keep them, because it's still the same product. Essentially, it's just the complexity is bigger because you have more users and everything, but it's something we should be solving. And also the truth is, teams that start on Bubble tend to be non-technical. And so, it's not because they get big that they become technical. Hiring engineers is hard when you're a small team. It's also hard when you're a big company. And so I think it would be it would be us failing on them to be like, hey, you're too big now, so you should go, Now, in practice, so to your question, I don't tell them to leave. I tell them that, we're here to support them till, hopefully when they get public through IPO or get acquired, because that's the mission that we've set for ourselves. And that's why I would say most of our resources are going today on actually like engineering and product resources in particular, but not only, also success in helping users and making sure they can scale on the platform as far as they need to without having to, migrate to something else. because again, this is how we can truly, prove that, it is possible to build like a significant application and a significant business on a product like ours. That means sometimes, working with users. So I highly encourage anyone that's listening to us that is starting to scale, to reach out to our team, because we actually have an internal team whose job is only to look at, scaling startups. And often we realize that people say, oh, had I known, I would have stayed on Bubble, and they just don't know. And, it's on our website and our email communication, but you know how it is. Like, people don't always know that. And so we definitely have ways to work with people. I would say people migrate not as much as you think, because it's actually quite painful to rebuild everything from the ground. We've seen example, and that was a very long time ago. So it was an example in 2015, 2016. So, and at that time, Bubble was significantly worse than what it is today. And we had a very large customer of ours telling us, they wanted to migrate. And, for 18 months, we had no news about what was going on, because it took them 18 months to rebuild the whole thing. And in the meantime, they kept, iterating on the platform built on Bubble. And again, it was a long time ago. It is pretty difficult for people to migrate. And so people tend to stick around. That being said, that doesn't mean we don't need to improve. This is a major push for us. In fact, we announced months ago now, last month, Bubble for Enterprise, which is not necessarily that we're trying to sell to enterprise clients, even though, that's we do have, conversations with very large companies, but it's our way to convey that, Bubble is built for scale. And there are a few things we've announced, part of this announcement, both in terms of security and compliance, but also, having better controls, because one of the things we're seeing is that when people start scaling, the teams gets bigger. So it's not necessarily that they need a different product in terms of their end product. It's more that they have a bigger team that is building on Bubble, hence they need to understand better what everybody is doing. And so that's the kind of things we've announced, so that people have better control. And we're going to keep announcing this. I mean, Josh could be talking a little bit of some of our plans on the performance side. It's definitely something that in the coming months is going to be one of our first topics for topic of interest, because we know this matters to our users as they scale. And the great news with our model is that when we solve a scalability problem for one particular client, we solve it for everyone, because it's one engine that is for the millions of applications that we have. And as a result, it's a high ROI for us to work on those things, because we never solve the problem for just one user, we solve it for everyone.
The other thing I'd say is we've had many examples of companies, going from Series A to Series B, raising money, growing on top of our platform, today. And we're, I think Emmanuel mentioned we launched an enterprise plan. We're working with massive corporations as well, with everything that implies in terms of, security, regulation, stuff like that. And we think it's very attractive for companies to stay on us as they grow, because frankly, if your app is built on Bubble, your costs are lower, you move faster as a team. So, everyone's incentive is to stay on the platform. And, we try and be a very open platform. It's very easy to connect Bubble apps to other services, and connect Bubble apps to, external databases. So it's easy to start with the Bubble tech stack. And if there is something that you need code for, you can hook it up. But the core application, I think a lot of our users really love seeing it grow on Bubble itself, because it keeps them very fast, very flexible, and very nimble as companies.
Right. So as in the beginning, it was I'm assuming it was a lot simpler than the offerings that you have now. So now you have so many different things in different platforms, mobile apps and web apps, and all of these different scaling up solutions and everything. So now it has become, while low code, while a regular person can just probably use it to build their idea on, but it still has enough of an offering that it would be a complex task to know about everything about Bubble. So do you guys have also a training platform or a certification or something similar that someone could be a Bubble expert, or do you want to in future? What?
Yes, I mean, with some caveats. So we have an academy with a lot of training material for people, and I strongly encourage everyone who starts on Bubble to look at that early in their journey and not go straight in the product and start building. Like there's definitely some learning curve, like for a couple of hours. And I think it's well invested time looking at the content that we have. That being said, where we see tremendous success actually is people in our ecosystem creating some content and teaching people how to use Bubble. And we see that we have a very global user base. Part of the reason being we're very community driven. And so it starts in countries that we didn't necessarily think of. I mean, countries, the US is actually, I mean, it's like about like 35% of our business, which sounds high, but for US companies, it's actually very small. For companies that were started in the US, and we have like very big communities, you know, in India, Brazil, France, the United Kingdom, Japan, and a lot of these countries actually have their own training centers, not run by us, and that's something that we're very comfortable and encouraging. We're encouraging people to start their own things because they usually know how to teach Bubble in a way that is more localized. Some of it, for obviously being the language part, that I think works very well in many places. So you have multiple ways to learn. Either you learn on your own with our self-serve content, or there are many people that can help you. We also see colleges teaching. So one thing that we're not letting the community handle, because you're talking about that, and that's something very important, is the certification side, because we think that we are uniquely positioned and we should really own that. Like, we're uniquely positioned to know who's good at Bubble and not good at Bubble. And so we've released a certification for people that are using Bubble that want to know how good they are. They can go to bubble.io/certification. And, you know, there is an exam to be certified. And that's something that we're going to keep investing on, because it is really important for us to ensure that as we grow and we see more and more people offering Bubble services, like building stuff for others, either on a contractor basis or on a full-time basis, and we see people looking for Bubble developers for their application, it's important for us to ensure that there is some level of quality, and certification is the right way to do that. So that's something we're going to keep pushing on, because the trustworthiness of the platform is really dependent on the trustworthiness of the ecosystem, and that's something that certification programs do very well.
Absolutely. No, that's actually really nice to know. And hopefully our audience will be quite inspired to know about it if they didn't already, and then sort of get themselves onto sort of learning more and going through the right order of learning, and then making their ideas come into reality. And I would be really interested to know. To our audiences, definitely reach out, and I'm sure I can also redirect them to you guys as well, if you have any really good ideas, or if you've built a product on Bubble that was successful or not successful. It could still be a good example of how a solution like this can be used. So definitely invite all our audience to do that.
One pattern we've seen a ton actually is someone coming to Bubble with an idea of a company that did not work out, because, you know, there are a lot of reasons why companies don't work out, but they were able to build their product successfully on Bubble, and then what they become is Bubble freelancers, or start even Bubble agencies. That's one way, you know, you can kill one bird with two birds with one stone, because you get to start your idea on Bubble and try something, and if it doesn't work, you actually acquire very valuable skill. I mean, there is today like a big shortage of talent in the Bubble ecosystem, which is why we started the certification, by the way, because when you have a shortage, a lot of people say they're good and they're not necessarily good, and that's why we need to certify them. But this is a pattern we've seen like hundreds of times at this point. Like, some of the biggest Bubble agencies in the world have been started by people trying something, startup ideas that didn't work, and they moved to being full-time freelancers.
Wow.
Yeah, I think,
that's another interesting route.
One of the things I notice is the community, because when we stumbled upon all these problems ourselves while building the app on Bubble, we used to go to the community and look for solutions. And I think the community is quite active, and they are like giving out solutions and telling you, okay, use this, do that, this is how you solve it. So I think the community part of Bubble is quite active, and I think that is something that people should also look into. Like, if they get stuck onto a problem, they should explore the community of Bubble as well.
Yes, absolutely. And
100%.
really, go on. Sorry, Emmanuel.
No, I was saying 100%. I mean, that in fact, the conference we did like 2 days ago now was all about that, like getting the community together. It's more vivid than ever.
Wow, amazing. No, I'm actually quite inspired myself. I definitely want to check out how it all works and whether I can figure it out. And thank you for the tip of going through the through the tutorials first. I usually have this bad habit of just, I think I can figure it out. I mean, when I buy IKEA furniture, I don't look at the manual, but then I eventually do have to look at the manual. So yes, no, this time I'm gonna look at the tutorials first. So before we wrap it up, I mean, this was an amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and it was really good to know all the aspects of Bubble. And obviously, one thing we all know that it's a low-code solutions for scaled up businesses. I mean, possibilities are endless. But I mean, obviously, you could say that that's the USP of Bubble. But is there any other sort of USP you would like to sort of for all of us to know that Bubble is and rest of everyone isn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the really core use cases of Bubble, right? Like helping entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are not necessarily just starting and scaling up companies, right? Like an entrepreneur can be a nonprofit founder, an entrepreneur can be a person in a larger company building like a tool to help them do their job, or some part of a larger company, right? Like what I'd say is Bubble is a tool for creators who are trying to bring something new into the world software-wise. But where that person lives can be pretty expansive, right? They're not necessarily, your prototypical like, venture-backed startup founder. And we're excited to support, all of those use cases.
Perfect. One last question that just came to me. How about games, web app games and mobile games?
I wouldn't try to like use Bubble to make a Doom clone. Like anything like super, graphics intensive or frame rate intensive is probably not in our sweet spot. But we've seen a lot of games that are like more like, text exploration or, online card games or anything where like the graphics aren't the core of what you're trying to create. Yeah, we've seen people do it with Bubble.
And
I do think I saw one building a Flappy Bird once on Bubble. So when you really know how to use Bubble and combine the different things that we have, you can do a lot of things, actually. But yes, Josh is right. It's not the primary use case like platform games.
So, I mean, following on from games, I just thought, okay, what about metaverse? Can we create apps for metaverse on Bubble, or is that something that's still not possible and maybe it'll happen in the future?
Yeah, ask us in 2026 and we'll get back to you on that
Oh,
one.
2020, so you have a deadline. Cool, cool. So I think we got most of the answers to the questions that we had. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for coming on our show. I think it was really valuable listening to your journey and then what Bubble can do for people and how you and your team can help people scale up. Because I think we had the same issue, and maybe I'll approach you guys to solve some of our challenges. But I think it is quite relevant in this world where there are so many options and people get overwhelmed with technology, and having a very simple solution to get their idea onto the web is really important and very empowering. And it's important. And you mentioned that you have a lot of customers in India and Bangladesh and Africa, Brazil, etc. And most of our audiences are actually in those countries, and they are looking to use technology in a way. I mean, they would know about technology, but they don't know the possibilities of the technology. And you coming on our show and showing them and telling them, okay, yeah, you can do this, you can do that, these are the possibilities. I think that's quite helpful. So thank you so much for coming. Do you have any last messages for our audiences?
I think the thought I'd end on is our mission as a company is empowerment. Like we're about, sort of as you said, like showing people the possibilities of technology and helping them create stuff. And a lot of our users who, I met a bunch of them in person, a couple of days ago at a conference, told me like they didn't think it was possible for them to be software creators, right? They didn't see themselves in the shoes of someone doing what they did, and they look back on it, they're like, wow, how did I get here? So I guess the party thought would be, you know, if you have that little itch, like maybe I want to try it, right? Because there's plenty of people who thought it was totally impossible for them and they did anyway. So that's the last thought I would leave.
Yeah, I mean, really, and we're here to help. You know, if people, our role is to partner with people as they start companies and, you know, grow on us. So, you know, ultimately their success is our success. So, you know, we'll do whatever we can to help. So don't hesitate, you know, you should try, you know, that's really what we're here for. And if we can help, reach out.
Perfect. Thank you again, you guys, for coming on this show. And this was it was really eye-opening and insightful conversation for me, and hopefully our audience enjoys it as well. Please do give us any feedback to our audience. If you have any questions relating to Bubble in particular, we can redirect those questions to you guys and potentially get some direct answers from the founders. Yeah, thanks again, Josh and Emmanuel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.